The Institute of Leadership and Management recognises great leadership as being multidimensional. We identify 5 dimensions: authenticity, vision, achievement, ownership and collaboration. We've broken down those 5 dimensions into 49 components, which enable us to organise our resources in such a way as to help individuals access the leadership development that is immediately relevant to them. This video introduces leading change, part of the dimension of vision. To further better organise our content and to enable our leadership support, development, knowledge to be more accessible for people when they need it, we further break down our components into what we call spotlights, but they are essentially subcomponents. And today I'm going to be talking about the 3 that we recognise as part of leading change. What is change? Look at some models of change management and then think about some of the emotional responses to change that we tend to hear quite a lot about. Visionary leaders need to recognise, or they do recognise indeed, that change is, as people keep saying, it's the new constant, and in order to keep up with that change, one has to constantly adapt. But I think organisations have always changed, because every time somebody new joins and somebody leaves, something happens externally, the organisation responds and adapts and it changes. And so change is part of life, but I think we sometimes confuse change with big change initiatives, which are not really the same as the day-to-day adapting to new circumstances, new ways of doing things. So change is a process of altering the way in which things are done. There's something about doing it today that will be slightly different from yesterday. And as this webinar series has developed, I've increasingly been quoting Peter Drucker. I think his common sense, practical and incredibly incisive insights into organisations are so valuable, even years and years after he actually first said them. And he recognises here, it's a lesson for all of us, that actually change isn't overlaying something on what we used to do. It's not an as well as, it's an instead of. So if you want to do something new, you have to stop doing something old. But we do change, and why we change and where the impetus for that change comes from obviously varies for every organisation, for every team really, within every department. Often it's because we want to improve and develop, but often it's also because we're responding to something that might be happening outside the organisation, or indeed something that is happening inside that we need to respond to and change in line with perhaps a change that's happening in another department. But when we're looking outside the organisation, we tend to use what very familiar to many of you would be the pestle analysis, where we group the potential possible changes or influences into these 6 categories. And I think never, certainly in my experience, has there been a situation where your pestle analysis has radical change going on in each of those categories. We've seen politics change in the last few weeks. Such different language of how we're talking about politics and the role of politicians in what's happening in the country. And we look back now at some of the infighting and the real unpleasantness that we saw in British politics, and that actually it might still be there, but it's very, very low key compared to how we have experienced it. There's been a huge impact on economies, that's undoubtedly the case. Sociologically, we're having now different expectations, I think, of not only what we consider to be a sound economy and a great measure of success, but also in our expectations of our politicians. There have been and are ongoing amazing innovations in technology. We're hearing about small businesses getting together, Brewdog changing its production lines to produce sanitizer, that science teachers are making masks, and it's sixth formers are creating hooks to put on the masks. So much is going on, so much innovation, and at the moment it's all part of the COVID-19 effort, but I think afterwards we will see that there has been significant technological change. One thing that really struck me, those of you that have volunteered to help the NHS, they're essentially using an Uber sort of app in order to manage the volunteers. And I thought, well, that couldn't have happened without the disruption that Uber gave, and it's now being applied in a totally different setting and is incredibly innovative. We've seen changes in legislation, of course, and what we're hearing all the time, perhaps more in the background, is environmental lobbies saying the positive impact that less travel is having on the environment, on wildlife, questioning our farming methods. So, as I say, never before has a pestle analysis been so dynamic. Over the years, many contributors have talked about change and offered models, explanations, and I think, to me, some of the best models are the ones that are really observations of what is happening anyway. I think that's what makes people like them. That's why they're enduring, they resonate, because there's something about certain models that people go, oh yeah, I see that, I get that, that's what happens around here. And not more so, I think, than the work of Lewin. The contribution he made in the area of force field analysis was to any change, look at what sort of the momentum, the drivers for it, the forces for that change and the forces against it. And although this is referencing physics, what I would just say is it's a great way of gauging really what the enthusiasm for something that is going to be changed, and what are the likely pitfalls, barriers, obstacles that you're going to make, because looking at the enthusiasm, the energy for the change at the same time as you're looking at what's going to impede it actually gives you a much more realistic picture of how successful you're likely or you need to be. Lewin presents this very simple position of a situation that before you can change anything, you have to unfreeze it. And I think in a way that's what Drucker was talking about when he was talking about you have to stop doing something old. You then implement your change and then refreeze. And although that seems incredibly simplistic, and we hear that you can't even go through these models of change that people are talking about, because barely has one change been implemented, then another one starts, or indeed you find that has to change as well. But what I think this represents at the moment is the notion of the new normal. And we do hear about that a lot, that there will be a new normal. And so many of us are looking forward in a way to whatever that new normal might be, and hoping that it's a good new normal. Another huge contributor to understanding of change, and somebody who has really guided a lot of successful change management programs, is Kotter. He first produced his Steps to Change in the 1990s, revisited it in 2014, and those of you who are members and do get our Edge magazine, which is also available on issue if you're interested to see it, our most recent edition has a feature on this very model. There's somebody talking about how they use it, the sense that they make of it. Often in any sort of conversation about change, especially from change management experts, you will hear about resistance to change, people not wanting it to happen, defending the status quo, wanting things to be the way that they always were. And again, a bit like Lewin's models, the recognition that these things happen is an observation based on the experience of so many people trying to implement so many change programs. You might have heard of the book The Change Catalyst by Campbell McPherson, and he asserts, and he's got some great videos on YouTube, that 88% of change initiatives fail. Now that's a particularly bold statistic, but it does back it up with other studies and other levels of disappointment when it comes to change. And I think any of us who have experienced change programs know that often they don't deliver what we hoped, and there is a sense of disappointment about them. But that's not because people are resisting change, because they're scared of it or they think they won't be able to cope with it. Because, as I'm going to say in a few minutes, resisting change can be quite a rational response to whatever is being offered as a change programme. Because when you look at what is needed in order to lead change successfully, if you really think that you're able to do that as an individual, when often it's going to be much more successful if it's much more collaborative, not only is you need to have that ability to inspire a shared vision, which is obviously what we recognise in the dimensions of leadership, but immediately get into that involving other people, other stakeholders, and the earlier people are involved in that change process. I think what that means often is letting go of an individual vision, because once you've put it out there, shared it with other people, it's no longer your vision, it's a new collaborative, co-created idea of what the future might be. And if we're part of that change process, I think it's often we lose sight of how modified, amended, adapted, different the initial idea is. But we've had so many more people involved in it that ultimately it's going to be better. But wherever you are in the change process, communicating what's going on, what's happening, are we succeeding? Are we celebrating sufficiently? Or do we still have a momentum? And I think going back to Kotter's 8 steps, what he does recognise throughout that is the need for the energy, for the momentum to keep the change going. Because if we don't, it might fade away and really disappoint us. We want to keep people motivated, and they are motivated if they're inspired to deliver something that matters and seems to matter to everybody around them. But to not lose sight of what we're changing things for, and to sort of persevere regardless as to what's happening externally, and therefore retain that ability to challenge what's going on and not to feel emotionally invested with any sort of initiative, that you can't let it go when it's not working and say, right, that was a mistake, let's let it go, because often that might be the right decision. I thought I'd finish with some insights, different perspectives on change. As I say, I introduced these models knowing that they are not a perfect representation, because that's what models are, but the fact that they've endured and they're popular means that they are helping us understand what's going on. But what Balogun and Johnson are bringing our attention to here is to not get drawn into the idea that somehow change is this linear process that does have these 8 steps, 6 steps, 5 steps, whichever model you use to guide you, that somehow we go from one to the other in this sort of straight or upward trajectory. And to remember that often we can't predict the future, and any change plan, it really is just an estimate of what might be happening. It's our best guess. So therefore there will be things that happen that we didn't expect. There will be unintended outcomes, and that's okay, as long as we remember when we're doing our plans that we cannot control the future. Another challenge here from Self and Schrader about resistance to change. If you're thinking about a big change programme that's going to affect a lot of people, a lot of systems and processes, the people closest to it might well have insights that those people further away, managing with big Gantt charts and project plans, don't have. So the resistance might not be somebody saying, I don't want new, I want things to stay the same. It might be because they know it's not going to work. So you have to really pay attention to the resistance, how it's articulated, listen to it, and don't just assume it's sort of some deviance. But the last words, I think, go to Ralph Stacey here, because he is challenging that idea of powerful people designing change programs that they're going to implement and do to other people. Because organisations, how we make sense of what's going on changes all the time in how we talk to each other. how we understand what the change is, what the steps are. Everybody knows how rife misunderstanding and miscommunication is, because people don't listen properly, they don't read properly, they don't pay attention because they're worrying about their own anxieties, and they construct what they think to be an understanding in conversation with others and themselves, and that will be very different from the big design that the change agent first initiated and thought about. So you can't control what's going to happen. You can pay attention to the conversations take place, and pay attention, as Self and Schrader have said, to those articulation of difference or disagreement, because they are telling you something about the sense that people are making of your change program. This is a huge area, which is why so many people are registered today. There's so many books written about it, and I think the essence of it is always that idea of bringing people as part of the process as early as you can, to keep honest and transparent communication going, and as Kotter identifies and recognises, keep the momentum, keep the energy with it, and then do celebrate every success along the way.